Now I told him, man, you don't need to be drinking that like that. That's prescription cough medicine. And he was already a little woozy, and a young man on top of that. And I told him he didn't need to be drinking it like that. And but I guess he just caught himself getting high drinking prescription cough medicine. But he just came by my house to, shoot the breeze and all that. And then, had this cough medicine, drinking it. And, you know, I thought that was crazy. I didn't look at see what the name was, if it was actually his or whatever. But even if it was prescribed for him, it's still not made to just drink out. Just he was drinking it like it was like a bottle of liquor or something like that. And I thought that was crazy. But he was pretty tight with his cousin, and he probably still is today. And he's the one that hooked me and her up. And me and her's dating, going together for a while, stuff like that. And one time, she comes over with her older sister and her boyfriend. And then she's like, you want to ride to Belle Island? And I was like, yeah, we can do that. And so we get in the car. And when we get in the car, uh, I don't remember this dude's name, but as years pass, he looked just like Jeffrey Dahmer is what he looked like. But I didn't know who Jeffrey Dahmer was back in them days. But that's what kind of cat he looked like. And who knows? I don't know if Jeffrey Dahmer's ever been in Detroit, but that's what the guy looked like. Because when years passed, I seen that. The first time I seen Jeffrey Dahmer, I was like, damn, that looks like just like the guy that we was. It was actually a girl named Gladys' boyfriend, and this was my girlfriend's sister. And I said, damn, that looked. When I first seen the Jeffrey Dahmer guy, I think the first time I seen it is when they made a movie about him or whatever. And I said, damn, I started thinking, I was like, damn, I've seen that guy somewhere before. And then I got to thinking about the time that they had came, not saying he's the same dude, but he looked just like him. And, but they had came by and picked me up. And then we rode out to Belle Isle, and they had vodka and orange juice, and they had some little plastic paper cups. I mean, not paper cups, but plastic cups. And everybody was, making drinks and stuff like that. We drove over there, rode around for a while, came back. Time we came back, I was pretty tipsy. So then I had to get inside the house without trying to avoid my dad, basically. And I had to get back into the house. And then what my plan was just get in the house and just go straight to bed. So that's what I did. And it kind of worked out. But if I'd have got caught, I'd have been in some big trouble because I was a young man and I wasn't supposed to be out there doing what I was doing. But back in them days, a lot of people experienced stuff at an early age, depending on, where they grew up at and what city they was in and who they, ran with and stuff like that. It just depends on the situation. But I know a lot of people that I grew up with we basically all experienced the same kind of stuff as far as, the drinking and smoking cigarettes and stuff like that. And at an early age, which now I look back on it and I'm like, man, I can't believe that the things that I did, when I was coming up. Like during school, I remember us going to school, and then, there's uh, two grades that I never went to, and it's fourth grade and fifth grade. I never been to them grades before. I went from the third grade to the sixth grade. And then when I had did that, I don't think there's too many people who did that. There's a lot of things I've did in life that probably nobody's ever did. But anyways, I had went from third to sixth. I started going to a school out on 7 Mile Road. And while I was going to this school, I made some new friends over there. And then a couple of my friends and myself, we decided we was going to skip school one Friday. So when we skipped school, my friend, he had brought 3 16-ounce Budweiser, cans of Budweiser in his jacket. So when we was walking down the alley, he started pulling them out. And then he was like, there's one for you, one for me, and one for you, And so, we opened them and drunk them. And this is sixth grade. And he actually had took them from his house. I don't know if they was his mom's beers or his dad's beers or grandpa's beers or whose beers they were, but he said he got them from home. And so he brought them, we drunk them. Now we got to hang out all day long until close to time for school to end. So we all have a few bucks on us and stuff like that. So we go to a liquor store, buy snacks and stuff like that. Then we walk over to a park that's not too far from the school. And we hang out at the park, and just talking and stuff like that. But as years pass, I can't even believe we did that, to be honest with you, because we was only in the sixth grade. But we had did that, and then it was getting close to time for school to end. So we just walked back to the school, and then went home from there. But the next day, we went back to school. We all three got sent to the office. Because what had happened is one of the teachers seen us, at school in the morning and just seen us walking away from school. So they knew what we did, And, but that was just an incident, that we had over there. And this was junior high. And then as time passed, and I went to high school, Southwestern High School in Detroit City. It's on 4th Street. And the last I checked on that school, it was abandoned, which a lot of schools, was abandoned, back in the day. But I don't know if they ever tore down and cleaned it up or tried to, I ain't checked on it lately to see what the scoop is on it. But now that I'm talking about it, I probably will check and see what the scoop is. But anyways, I had started going to Southwestern High School in Detroit. When I started going to this school, they were giving out, because I lived a decent ways away from the school, and they were, I walked to school a couple times, and then somebody in my class told me that if you live a distance away from school, you can go to the office and they'll give you enough bus tickets to ride the bus. In my case, I got bus tickets and transfers. Because, I'd have to walk down, I'd walk down Livernois to 4th Street, and then 4th Street down to Southwestern High School. And then what me and some friends of mine did at this school, and this wasn't all the time, it was just here and there, But what we had did, because they got bus tickets and transfers also, so what we did, sometimes we would not go to school, and we'd just take the bus downtown Detroit, where the Renaissance and Cobo Hall and all that is, and we would just hang out there for the day. And we'd always make sure we take money so we can go to McDonald's inside the Renaissance Center and eat lunch and stuff like that. But we'd go down there and just hang out for the day, and then when it got close to time for school to be out, we'd take the bus back to our neighborhood and just, act like we went to school. But really, we ditched school, And it wasn't all the time. It was just here and there once in a while. But who hasn't, ditched school back in the day, There was a lot of people did that, Whether they, ditched school and just went to their friend's house, or for us, in our case, we would just ride the city bus and go downtown, hang out, and ride the city bus back. And, it wasn't a thing because we had the bus tickets and the transfers, So it'd be the same as going to school and then coming back from school. But I remember one time I was walking home one time from Southwestern, and they have like a little white restaurant on 4th Street. It's kind of across from the Detroit, I think it's the Detroit Produce Company, where a lot of trucks show up and all that, big factory like, or a big warehouse. And there's this white restaurant, and I had stopped in there because I wanted to get a drink and a donut. And I believe it was Mott's. I want to say the name of it was Mott's Hamburgers or something like that. Like a little miniature, looked like a little miniature White Castles. And they also have Tailways on Michigan Avenue, and it's called Tailways Hamburgers, And that's like a miniature White Castle also. But anyways, I went into this, and I'm a young cat at the time, but I went into this restaurant to grab a donut and a drink, and there was this hooker in there. And obviously she was taking a break or getting something to eat or something. She was sitting there, and she was, coming on to me, flirting with me and stuff like that. And I was a young dude. And, I was talking to her, just trying to be polite, but I was like, I don't know what this lady's intentions are, but I ain't got no interest of, doing nothing but just talking to that lady, But the way she was, going on with me and stuff like that, it seemed like she was wanting more than just a conversation. You know what I mean? So that really stuck with me because it was just this lady was you would have had to you just have to picture it and just picture the lady. She was had a lot of makeup on and just it was just you know a hooker from Detroit basically. But anyways, that was a trip, and I have got my donut and drink, and then took off and started walking back to Livernois. So I was heading back home, and I remember at this time, I I go home, and a lot of times I would go home, hang out for a little bit, and then I would go pick up my girlfriend. But I had at the time I was watching the news, and this is when uh, what a lot of people may know today is White Boy Rick movie, but this is Rick Wershe Jr. He at this time when I'm in the ninth grade, he is going to court, and this is before he gets sentenced and everything, and he's going to court, but I'm watching it on the news, and they're saying, a lot of people was coming into the courtroom, and I don't know if they were there on his behalf or just going there to, see if he would say something or tell something or whatever. I really don't know the situation, but they were just saying on the news that a lot of dudes had showed up there, and when he was going to court and stuff like that. And but anyways, I remember trying to keep up with that, and then he got sent away. And I think he got life without the possibility of parole at the time in question, you know. And then, I thought that was crazy, but after that happened, you know, just like anybody else, life goes on, and then, you just move on doing your day to day stuff, But that guy's always been in the back of my mind because I had watched it on the news, and I just always wondered about dude, And I never knew if he got out or what the situation was because, it was just always a thought with me that, I was wondering if that dude was like still in jail, whatever. But, anyways, many years pass, and then they come out with the movie White Boy Rick, and I watched that. But you know how movies are; it's nowhere close to what really happened. You know what I mean? So, uh, you know, some of it was probably accurate, but then I think a lot of it was like Hollywood and stuff like that. And but years later, he ends up getting out, and I couldn't believe that he was locked up all that time. And then when it started talking about he was getting out and stuff like that, then I was on top of it again, keeping up with it, watching it, stuff like that. And I was just glad dude got released, but I couldn't believe that he was in there all them years. You know, it was just something that I just couldn't believe it. So that being said, I'm glad Rick is free. He's doing good, living good, and things like that. Because if somebody, I think it was a judge that seen her way clear to, you know, let him get paroled and stuff like that. Because if nobody would have, you know, seen their way clear to, help him out, he probably would have still been in there as of today. Because his sentence was, life without parole. And those of you that's not familiar, I mean, y'all might have seen the White Boy Rick movie, but the ones that's not familiar with it, you can look him up and you can find out a lot of stuff about him, you know. And dude he just, ended up getting a raw deal, and there's a lot of things in behind the raw deal that he got, You just have to do the research and stuff because if I started telling you about it, I could go for days. It's just a whole bunch of stuff, and he's actually talked about it and stuff like that. But it's just a crazy shit that happened in Detroit City, and they was determined to keep him put away for a long time, and it was just unjustified. Just put it that way. So that being said, I'm glad he is free and living well and doing all different kinds of things, stuff like that. So shout out to Rick Wershe Jr. from Detroit's darkest times. But yeah, that was just an incident that I had, watched on the news when he first got sent away. And then years later, I couldn't believe that he had been locked up for that long. But then one time I was watching the news, and this would be like every time I'd get home from high school, I would like watch a little bit of the news and stuff like that. And I remember one time there was a couple on Trumbull Avenue, and the news that was at their house, and what they had said is somebody had broke in their house, tied them up, and robbed them. You know, and it was on the news and stuff. That's how I'm aware of it. And then one time, me and my friends are walking past it because it's only like a block away from my house on Livernois. And me and my friends are walking past it, and I told them, I said, "Man, that house was on the news the other day." And they was like, "What happened?" And I said, "They claimed that somebody had broke in and tied them up and robbed them." So, the police were there, the news was there, and all that. But then as we walked past and got on down away from their house, I said, what was crazy about it is they moved out of that place and moved right next door to another house, you know. And I thought that was crazy because I told my friend, if somebody did that and you was trying to move away, would you move right next door or and then my friend was like, man, that was probably a set up deal. They probably robbed somebody or they was probably working for somebody and set up a robbery where they could actually keep the money. That's what a friend of mine said. And I was like, man, there ain't no telling, because I thought it was weird that they said all that happened to them and then they just moved out of one house right next door to the other house. So what my friend said could have been accurate. You know what I mean? Because back in them days, you know, a lot of people worked for people as a side hustle to get money, you know, and then some individuals would take a chance of doing something like that and not knowing that you just going to have to convince the guy that you're working for that that really happened. And that could have been why the news was there and all that. I'm not for sure. But, you know, I don't know if they had any repercussions behind that or whatever. But the way my friend was talking, he was like, they basically probably robbed herself and just made it look like it was a robbery, you know. And I was like, man, there ain't no telling really. But that was just another crazy incident that happened, you know. But that Southwestern school that I went to when I was going to school there, as soon as you went in the front door, you had to walk through a metal detector. And they would, you know, just be checking people for guns and stuff like that. And that was every day you had to do that. So sometimes, you know, it would kind of be a little crowded because people would be having to walk through there. And then if somebody set off the, you know, metal detector, they'd pull them to the side and see what the situation was. So, you know, it was a little bit inconvenience, but everybody knew they was just searching to see if anybody had any guns or anything like that, you know. But that was crazy. But I had a good time at Southwestern, and it was interesting. It was a big school, and that's just some of the things that went on, you know, with me. Southwestern School in Livernois. Livernois holds a lot of stories behind a lot of individuals, you know, people I know and, you know, stuff like that. And I remember I had this one friend, he had got hit and ran over. And it messed him up, you know, for a good long time. But he ended up suing the people. I don't know if he sued the people or the insurance company or whatever, but he ended up getting a good chunk of money and stuff like that. And but he was telling me the story, what had happened, and I just couldn't believe it. You know, he said he was just crossing over the street, and the person, I don't know if the person was drinking or just not looking or what, and just actually, you know, hit him, you know. And he never mentioned how much money he got, but he got a good chunk. And but you know, he partied a lot and stuff like that. And he partied up at Cozy Cole's bar, stuff like that. But you know, that was a crazy incident. You just never know, you know, what's going to happen. So, you know, and he said he was just trying to cross the street. So just because you cross the street don't mean that everybody's alert that's in the car. So you got to really keep your eyes open and watch, you know, what's going on, stuff like that. And another friend of mine, one time I'm in my apartment, and then him and a girl shows up at my apartment, and they got 2 cases of beer, and they wanting to party and stuff like that. So I told them, come on in, you know, and we was hanging out, And they stayed all the way up until early morning, and then they had left. And I just thought that was weird that they both showed up, you know, at the time they did, because wasn't expecting anybody, but we had a good time, stuff like that. And but we had a lot of different encounters with different folks. I had two of these dudes that was friends of mine. They lived a block up from Jim Pollard's store, right on the corner of Livernois. It was two Indian dudes, and they had real long black hair. And these cats, what they did in their basement of their house, they had some bricks that were took out of the wall. So you just got, there's just dirt, and they would shoot guns in their basement, you know, a lot. And a lot of times you could walk past their house and you could hear, gunfire and stuff like that. But somebody who didn't know what they were doing would probably take off running. But I remember one time I was walking across over, coming back from my girlfriend's house, and I come down their street going toward Livernois. And I got right by their house, and you hear different guns going off and stuff like that. But I already had news that they shot guns in their basement. And I just kept going. One day, one of the brothers seen me on Otis and Livernois. I was right in front of the Big D's bar. And, we just shooting the breeze. And he's like, man, he said, I wished I had you and your brother the other day with me. And I was like, what happened? And he said he was down at the Hart Plaza and he got into a fight with some dudes, but it was just him. And he was like, I could have really used you and your brother. He said, because, I got into it with a guy, but then some other guys was, got involved. So